Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and we're back again at the My Collection of 2016. And I think it's pretty obvious which one comes after the NES, right? I mean, it's the Super Duper Nintendo. In fact, it was actually the first system I ever owned, and, well, it's just fucking great. There's nothing much else I can say about that, but either way, let's start from number to Z. So the first one here is the Seventh Saga. And this is a turn-based RPG, and let me tell you, this game is pretty fucking hard. And it's not even like hard in a way where it feels satisfying. I don't know what it is, but I just really couldn't get into this one. I mean, like, the graphics for one are kind of ugly to look at. The story isn't anything great, but the music in it is kind of cool, but that's really the only redeeming factor I can think about with this one. But, yeah, like I said, I can't really get into this one, though, but I think it's not really a bad RPG. I just think it's a little bit more on the mediocre side, but that's just my opinion. Next is a big favorite of mine that I happen to be talking about quite recently, and that is, ActRaiser. Fuck yeah. Basically, this game, to sum it all up, is that it's like a mix between SimCity and Castlevania. And, of course, maybe a little bit of, like, a shooter, since, you know, you gotta defend the city from monsters and shit, but either way, fucking love this game. Super Adventure Island, and in case you don't know, I actually categorize my games without counting the word super for Super Nintendo games because there's just so many that have the word super in them, so, you know, that's why I just put this in the letter A because, you know, Adventure Island. So anyways, this is a pretty good one, but I definitely don't think it's not nearly as good as the NES Adventure Island games. I think those ones are much better, but this one is still good, but one thing I do have with this game is that this one, they tried to make it like a fucking torture chamber because it's so goddamn hard. Arrow the Acrobat. And I remember I used to play this one years ago at a friend's place, but he had the Genesis version, and I remember at the time I really liked it, but ever since I got the game again and I started playing it, like, and this was like somewhat recently, I was like, you know, this game isn't as good as I remember it being. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, it definitely does have some pretty interesting elements to it, but I don't know, I just didn't like it as much there, but it still is a pretty good game, considering, you know, it is one of those games that, those mascot games where it tried to, like, rip off, like, Sonic and Mario, but this one actually ended up being more good than bad, I'd say. Next up is Arcana. In fact, this is a game I did a review on a couple months ago, and it's an RPG that has a first-person dungeon crawling, you know, kind of like Enter and Odyssey. And I do think this is a pretty good one. I actually did enjoy it quite a bit, even though I do find, like, you know, like, the story in it isn't all that great, and the characters in it are just kind of okay, I guess, but I just really like the gameplay of it because, in case you don't know, I actually really do enjoy first-person dungeon crawlers, and I also like the music in this game. The music in this game is actually pretty fucking awesome. Very underrated OST, and of course just a pretty underrated game in general, but I'd say I would recommend it if you do like that kind of stuff. Next up is Batman Returns, and yes, this is a pretty great beat 'em up, although I do kind of wish they had a co-op mode, because I think it's only one player if I remember correctly. I mean, there might be two players, but I haven't played in a little while there, so I could just be getting mixed up, but either way though, this is still a pretty great one, and it's still a whole lot of fun, but probably my favorite thing about this game is the sound effects, because just punching motherfuckers is just so, like, goddamn satisfying, or just throwing them against the wall, it's fucking great. Next is Super Bomberman 2, and yeah, this is actually a pretty great Bomberman game. I mean, if you know what Bomberman is, it's pretty much all the typical stuff, but this one, you know, it's in like a maze, and you just gotta, like, clear through all the enemies, and then you just go to the next stage, and then of course, there's also boss stages, and the bosses in this game are really hard, but still, this is actually a really fun game, very addicting, and of course, you know, if you like Bomberman, then you'll definitely love this game. Super Castlevania 4, and, well, what can I say that already has been said like a bajillion times is that, yes, this game is fucking awesome, and I really love it a whole bunch. In fact, it's probably my favorite Castlevania game that's like, you know, like a stage-to-stage sort of game, like the non-Metroidvania games. Also, it was actually the only Castlevania game that I ever finished. Next up is Contra 3 Alien Wars, and yes, this game is just fucking awesome, as to be expected from a Contra game, of course, and a lot of people say this one's actually like one of the easier ones, and I can kind of agree to an extent, but of course I'm just not really good at Contra to begin with, so I've just never been able to beat this one, but hey, it's still addicting as hell, and I just love it a whole bunch. Next up is Chess. Well, Chess Master, and, well, yeah, it's just chess. Next we have is a reproduction card of a game that I played the hell out of on emulation, and that is Clock Tower. And yes, this game is just awesome. In fact, it's actually part of one of my favorite horror series, and it's actually one of the very few horror games that came out on the Super Nintendo, or I should say, the Famicom, because originally this game never came outside of Japan, which is kind of unfortunate, but thankfully we do got these bad boys that to help us out with that if we do want to play on our, original consoles and stuff. But yes, it's a really good point-and-click adventure game, or, adventure/horror and all that kind of stuff, and really good music, really good graphics, and of course has some really interesting endings. And last thing I will have to say is that I really do like that label that they did on this one. It's actually pretty awesome looking. Kid Clown and Crazy Chase, and this is actually a pretty fun game, I will admit. Like, it's not like an amazing game, but I do think it is pretty addicting for what it is, where basically you're using Kid Clown, you're running down the hill in an isometric view, and you gotta collect all the different, like, icons, which are, like, represented with cards, and then you gotta get down to the hill within a time limit while avoiding all the different obstacles. It is a pretty frustrating game, but at sometimes there, you just don't want to give up, and you just want to continue on playing, which is actually a pretty good thing. Next we have is one of my favorite series of all time, and that's Donkey Kong Country. And, well, there's just so much things I could say here, but I'd be here for freaking ever if I were to talk about these games. But, yeah, just to keep it short, they're fucking amazing, love them a whole bunch, and really, you really can't go wrong with anything about these games. I mean, the gameplay, the graphics, the music, I mean, it's all just fucking good shit. And, of course, if you haven't played these games, then you need to do yourself a favor and just play them eventually. Next we have is Faceball 2000, and this is actually a really weird and hilarious one, but basically it's a first-person shooter where you gotta shoot at a bunch of happy faces in a maze. I'm not even kidding, but it's actually not a bad game for what it is. Now, yes, for a first-person shooter on the Super Nintendo, obviously it has a lot of limitations, and the controls are not really the greatest, but you do get used to them, and it is just really amusing-ass game, really, there. But the one thing that is interesting to note is that the Game Boy version of this game, apparently you can actually play up to like 16 people, which is pretty fucking crazy to think. Next we have is the Fatal Fury games on the Super Nintendo, and yes, these ports may not be like the greatest ports ever. I mainly have them there mainly because, I'm a huge fan of SNK and I just really like Fatal Fury in general, but I will say though, Fatal Fury 2 is actually really, it actually plays really well for Super Nintendo. Like, obviously it's not nearly as good as the arcade version or the Neo Geo version or anything like that, but I still think it does play fairly well. Where the first one plays decently, I mean, it's playable, but there are a couple issues, but of course, like I said, I think Fatal Fury 2 is the best one to get on Super Nintendo. Next up is probably one of my favorite racing series of all time, and that is F-Zero. Fuck yeah. Even though there's not a whole lot I can say that already has been said before, but even though this one is, not my most favorite entry into the series, but of course, it is still a very important one to play. Super Ghouls and Ghosts. Oh man. This is a great game, but as you know, this game is fucking hard as shit, and the furthest I ever got through this game, I think I got to the, I think it's called the Ghoul's Stomach, I think it is. It's a place where, you're flying on, a little cloud thing, and then there's, teeth, coming out from, the ceiling and the floor and shit. It's insanely fucking hard, but man, this game just has, some really awesome graphics, great music, and of course, it's just a really badass game that's really fucking hardcore. Next up is a movie license game you probably didn't know had a game adaptation, and that is The Hunt for Red October. Yeah, I actually did a review of this game a long while back, but that review was, kind of shitty. But either way, though, surprisingly, this game is actually not as bad as you might think it is. I mean, it's not great, but it's at least very playable. Basically, it's kind of like a shoot-'em-up where you're playing like a submarine, but it's, very, very slow. Unfortunately, it's not nearly as good as the game In the Hunt. I mean, that's really unfortunate there, but for what it is, it's actually not bad, but I don't know, I mainly have this there because I found it at a thrift store for $2 and I thought, you know what, it's worth a try. Next we have is Illusion of Gaia, a pretty great action RPG if I say so myself, and even though the story in this one is uber depressing, which is not a bad thing either, but it's just one of those things I was just not expecting for this type of game, but either way though, it's actually a pretty great game, and if you haven't played it, then I can definitely recommend it to you if you do like action RPGs. Inido Way of the Ninja, which is actually an RPG made by Koei, which is kind of interesting because they don't really make games like this, but this game's actually not bad, but there's just a lot of shit involved, and of course, because of that, not many people are gonna like this one, but I do like it for what it is, but like I said, there's a lot of shit involved, of course, it is, a simple turn-based RPG, and at the same time, there's some strategy elements involved, and then there's, a lot of, political shit, you gotta know, like what country is doing what, and there's also a lot of like recruitments you gotta do. There's just a whole bunch of shit there. But it is actually pretty good if you can really get into it though, so you know, if you really do like the games like Nobunaga's Ambition, things like that, then I can definitely recommend it for that. Well, I just think just from looking at the back of this cartridge, it should be pretty obvious what this game is, right? Well, it's not a reproduction game, that's for sure, and that is Killer Instinct. Yeah, this game is just awesome. Just really good fighting game, love the whole characters, I love the music, graphics, and yeah, I just freaking love this game. Not a whole lot that I can say, but it's just awesome. Now these games over here are probably one of the most well-known games ever, and that's the Mario games. So, you know, first thing is first is, you know, Super Mario World. I mean, if you own a Super Nintendo, then it's guaranteed that you probably do own this game, or you've owned it at one point in your life, and well, it's a fucking great game, and it's also one of the first games I owned for the system that I still have. Same thing with this one. This one also came with my system too when I got it, and that is Yoshi's Island. And yeah, this one's also really good, even though it's not nearly as good as the first one in my opinion, but it still has some really good like level designs and such. It's just, you know, you just want to try your best not to get hit in this game because, you know, you just want to fucking go deaf. And then as for this one, this is Super Mario Bros. RPG, The Legend of the Seven Stars. Bleh. Well, anyways, yes, this is the one from, you know, Square Enix and shit, and you know what? It's fucking awesome as hell. Really love it a whole bunch. Love all, like, the original characters they had in here, like Mello and Gino and, like, a whole bunch of other good shit, and yeah, it's just a fucking great game. And as for this one, this is Super Mario All-Stars, and, well, yeah, it's just basically a remaster of all the Mario games, plus, you know, Mario 2, the original one, which is kind of interesting. And then this one is Super Mario Kart, a pretty awesome game for the time, and, well, I still do think it is awesome. It's just, you know, there's just so many other Mario Kart games that I think just, you know, improved upon it so much more, but, of course, this one is still a classic. And then we got Mario Paint, and, yeah, unfortunately, I can't play this game anymore because I don't have the mouse or the pad anymore, which kind of sucks. I don't know what happened to my mouse, but I do remember what happened to the pad, is that I remember a friend of mine came over and he accidentally sat on it and the whole thing just, like, cracked in half. Now, while it did suck, I will admit it was kind of funny the way how it happened, but either way, though, it is kind of unfortunate I can't play this one anymore, but, oh well, whatever. I can just play it on the emulation if I really wanted to. And lastly, this is actually a reproduction card again, but this one is actually a ROM hack of Super Mario World called Super Mario Return to Dinosaur Island. And this is actually a pretty awesome ROM hack, if I say so myself. Some really good secrets, even though some of them are pretty cryptic as hell, but there's actually some pretty awesome level designs from original Super Mario World, and, well, it's actually a pretty awesome one. Next up is a good old classic, and that is Mega Man X. Yeah, fucking love this game. Not a whole lot that I can say that has been said like a bajillion times, but yeah, it's probably one of my favorite Mega Man X games, mainly because this is the one I played the most. But of course, X2 is still like fucking fantastic, and X3 is also really good as well. But of course, one thing I just gotta say here is that Storm Eagle theme is just phenomenal. Next is Mortal Kombat 3. And this is kind of a weird one because everything about this game is pretty much like top notch, you know, like the graphics, the music, and, you know, the game plays really well, but the only one complaint I do have with this version of the game is that it has this really fucked up thing where basically, like, the first time you fight someone, they'd be, like, super duper easy, and then, like, the next person you fight will be, like, ridiculously hard, like, they would, like, constantly, like, run at you and just totally, like, destroy your fucking asshole. And then after, like, when you, like, continue on and then you pick another character or whatever, and then you fight them again, they'll be super easy, and then the next person will be, like, fucking hard as hell, and yeah, I don't fucking know what the hell deal is with this game and why it was programmed like that, but yeah, other than that this game's actually a lot of fun. I'd probably only play this game with like 2 players though. Next we have is The Legend of the Mystical Ninja. Pretty awesome game if I say so myself, and this is actually a part of a really long ass series that, you know, most of them were only released in Japan, which kinda sucks, but at least the ones that we did get over here are pretty damn awesome, just like this one, but yeah, basically this is like an action game where it kind of has like a top-down view at first, and then it kind of goes into a side-scrolling stage later, and yeah, it's just a whole lot of fun. I can definitely recommend playing this one. Phalanx, which is the game with the most fucked up cover ever, at least for a shoot 'em up anyways, because yes, this game is pretty much known for having a really fucked up cover. Basically, it's the guy with the banjo, and, there's a dog in there, which, you don't see the dog on, like, the main box of the game, but on the cart, yeah, you do see him, but yes. This is actually a shoot 'em up game that's actually pretty damn good, if I say so myself. I actually did do a review of it like a really long ass time ago, and the review was, it was okay, I guess, but I don't know. I can still say that this is actually a really good shoot 'em up, despite the box cover just looking random as fuck. Next we have is Pieces, which is a pretty obscure game that is very underrated, if I say so myself. I did do a review of it a couple months ago, and I also did mention it in my video response to Tayson Spot about games you do wish you want to have on the Super Nintendo Mini whenever it comes out. But yes, this game basically, it's kind of like Tetris Attack, where, instead of playing a game of Tetris, you gotta, like, solve a jigsaw puzzle, and you do get, like, power-ups to help you out, or you can get power-ups to fuck over your opponent, and this game is just a fucking great time, man. Like, I really definitely do enjoy this one a whole bunch, and like I said in that review, if you really do like puzzle games, or, like competitive puzzle games, then I can definitely recommend this one. And also, lastly, I'll mention is that this game was actually made by the same people that made the Disgaea games. In fact, it was actually their very first game, which is kind of interesting to know. Next we have over here is, Pocky and Rocky. Definitely freaking love this game, man. It's basically like a top-down shooter. You get to move in any direction. Although, in some weird ways, it kind of reminds of Zelda if it was a shooter, because, it's like top-down view, and, like, your health are, like, indicated with hearts, and also the game is just kind of fucking crazy there, because there's just so many weird-ass enemies and weird-ass bosses, but it's just a hell of a good time. And it's just like, it looks like a very beautiful game, and it sounds awesome, and, well, there's not really much else I could really complain with this game, but yes, it's definitely one of my favorites on the system, for sure. Next up is Prince of Persia, just like the classic series, where, like, every time you want to jump from somewhere, you gotta time your movements just right, and of course, if you want to, like, go down, you gotta, like, go down slowly. You can't just jump down, or else you take damage, so yeah, like, just as to be expected with the classic series of Prince of Persia, it is a pretty slow-paced platformer, but it's more about the puzzles, really, there, and of course, with that being said, it is a pretty tough game, but it is actually a pretty fun, and I do enjoy it quite a bit. Now, this one over here is Samurai Showdown, a pretty fucking awesome arcade series, but unfortunately, this port is, like, not the greatest. I mean, I know, like, a lot of people say it's, like, massively shitty, but I don't think it's that bad. I mean, it is very playable, it's just, it's a little bit slower pace, and of course, like, the sound quality of, like, some of, like, the voices are just really fucked up. Like, it just sounds like... Next one here is Sim City. Now, this is actually a pretty great game, and this one is surprisingly better than the PC version at the time, which is pretty crazy to think about, mainly because not only does, like, the game, like, look just as nicer, but also, like, it actually has music, and one thing I really do like about this version that's pretty awesome is that whenever you get, like, a monster trying to attack your city, it's actually Bowser, which is pretty awesome. I mean, that's not something you can say every day, that Bowser's gonna go, like, destroy a city. I mean, that's fucking awesome. Next one here is Spawn the video game, and I remember I got this game, like, a few years back, and when I seen it, I was like, holy shit, they made a Spawn game on the Super Nintendo? Well, that's pretty damn awesome. Well, unfortunately, the game, I wouldn't say it's awesome, but I wouldn't say it's bad either. It is a very playable beat-em-up, but of course it's one of those beat-em-ups where, like, pretty much like most of the enemies, you can pretty much kill them in one hit, and of course you do get some pretty cool moves that you can do in the game, but it's really the boss battles where, that's where it kind of feels like an actual beat-em-up, but even then it's a decent game, but it's definitely not nearly as bad as what a lot of people think it is, but that's just my personal opinion, though. And this one over here is a red cartridge, and, well, there's really only 2 games on the Super Nintendo where that would be, and that happens to be Maximum Carnage. I have some really good times with this game, because this is actually a game I remember renting, like, many years ago, and, well, at the time, I freaking loved it, and you know what? I actually still do enjoy it quite a bit. Mainly because, like, the music is awesome. In fact, it actually has, like, that rendition of, like, Mob Rules, which is pretty great. And of course, it is just a pretty fun beat-em-up. It's also really hard as hell, and even though I do wish this one did have a 2-player mode, at least it did make an extended version called Separation Anxiety, where it actually has that, but I never actually got around to playing that one, though, but still, I always have some really great times playing this one, though, for sure. Now we've got another Spider-Man game over here, and that is Spider-Man and X-Men. And this one, unfortunately, I don't like this one as much as Maximum Carnage, but I still think this one is okay. I mean, it's not great, but it's not really bad either. I don't know. I just think the platforming in this one just could have been done a little bit better, but it's definitely not nearly as bad as what some people say it is, because, you know, a lot of people will say it's shit because of the LJN logo on it, but no, it's not that bad, but it's at least okay, I guess. Next up is Star Fox, a pretty fucking awesome game that really doesn't need a whole bunch of introduction about it there. But one thing that is funny that I will say here is that a friend of mine I knew used to call this game Furries in Space, which used to crack the hell out of me up. Next up is the Super Star Wars games, and yeah, these games are pretty great, and of course, you know, they follow the movie pretty well, they follow like the iconic scenes, and you know, the really awesome gameplay. Really love like the big jump attack with like the front flips and shit. I mean, that's badass as fuck, but of course, these games are hard as balls. Next up is a classic one, and that is Street Fighter 2, the regular one that I have a lot of nostalgia for, not the like Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious edition one that they have like a bajillion and like a Google and 99 amount of them. Next up is Stunt Race FX, which is, you know, one of the games with the FX chip, and you know, as a kid, I actually really loved this game, mainly because, you know, it's a racing game where you're racing around in cars that have big giant googly eyes. I mean, that's pretty great. But playing it now, it's it's definitely not as good as I remember it being. I mean, it's okay, I guess. I mean, it's playable. It's just, you know, it's one of those games where you play it as a kid, and if you play it now, and it'll be like an entirely different game, it almost feels like. Next up is Sunset Riders, which is another pretty big favorite of mine. In fact, it's probably one of my favorite running gun games on the Super Nintendo. Hell, I even like it better than Contra 3, personally. But that's just my opinion there. But either way, this is just a fucking awesome game that I can highly recommend playing in case you haven't. Next we have is Supernova, which is the only game in my collection that I actually put under the name Super, because, you know, it's not this game, it has like Super tacked onto the name, but either way though, this is actually a pretty fucking awesome shoot 'em up that's in the same series as Darius, and well, it's just fucking awesome. Just love the music, love the graphics, love the gameplay itself, and well, you know, it's really hard as hell, but definitely very satisfying, and of course, it's just Taito goodness. Next up is Super Valis 4, a very underrated action platforming game that I just really enjoy a whole bunch, but while I do think this game is great, one thing that is kind of weird with it is that this is kind of the same scenario as Dracula X in the fact that there's a Super Nintendo version, and then there is a PC Engine CD version. And of course, you know, this PC Engine CD version is like a bajillion times better than this version, but this version as its own is still pretty great for what it is. Now, this is a pretty random-ass game that I own, but the main reason why I have this one is because it was actually given to me by my neighbor, like, many, many years ago. Like, I think I was only, like, what, like, 6 years old or some shit? Well, either way, this game is, Winter Olympic Games of '94, where I think it was in Germany, I think it was. Well, basically this game is, you know, it's pretty typical generic shit there, but for what it is, it plays alright, but of course, one of the main things that is very memorable to me about this game is the music. I find the music in this game is really catchy, and of course, you know, the fact that I played like the shit out of this game way back in the day is also another reason why I have a lot of nostalgia for it. And this one over here is X-Men Mutant Apocalypse, and yes, this is a pretty awesome beat-em-up, but really hard as hell because, you know, you can die like super easily there, but there is actually some pretty cool characters used. You get to use some pretty cool powers, and, you know, that's to be expected, and there's also some pretty nice stages too. But yeah, this is actually a really fucking hard-as-hell game, but it's definitely a whole lot of fun. Now, next up, we have a pretty big favorite series of mine, and that is the East series. And yes, this is East 3, Wanderers from East, which is kind of like the black sheep of the series, because this one doesn't have like the top-down view. It's actually kind of like a side-scrolling view, and so in a lot of ways, it's actually a lot like Zelda 2, which is actually pretty awesome. Although this game is not nearly as good as Zelda 2, but it's still a pretty good game, nonetheless. And it also has some pretty epic music, as to be expected. But yeah, definitely a really awesome game for sure. And as for this one, this is actually a reproduction cart of Ys 4, Mask of the Sun, which is one of the non-official Nihon Falcom games, because there was actually two Ys 4s, and they both were not developed by Nihon Falcom, where this one was made by crap, I can't think of the name right now there. But either way, though, this is actually a pretty typical Ys game because this one, like, it's a top-down view and has, like, the original, like, bumping mechanic stuff. And it is a pretty good one. Of course, this game is hard as hell, but, that's actually, like, one of the key things within a Ys series, that they're all pretty fucking hard as hell. Except for the main fourth game that they made on the Vita, but that one still has its pretty challenging moments still. Da 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 da. Link to the Past, which is like pretty much like my favorite Zelda game of all time. I don't care what anyone says, it's like my all-time favorite. But either way, though, fucking awesome game. Nothing much I can really say here that already has been said before, and I can really go on and on about this game with so many memories and shit, but we'd be here forever. But either way, it's just fucking epic shit. Now, this is the last game that I have in my Super Nintendo collection, and that happens to be Zombies Ate My Neighbor. Fucking love this game. It's basically like a top-down shooter, and you can also play like cooperatively, and it's just a whole lot of fun. Basically, I consider this to be like Dead Rising, but with like, very cartoony, and of course, you're not like combining a bunch of weapons together, but you're still using like a whole bunch of like crazy-ass weapons, like, like popsicles that explode and shit. I mean, that's pretty great. But yeah, really can't go wrong with this game, and there's also like a shitload of levels in the game, if you could believe it. So that is all that I have for the Super Nintendo as of 2016. So with that being said, what are some of your favorite Super Nintendo games that you have, or some of your favorite Super Nintendo games that you have memories with, or, all that kind of good stuff? So anyways, let's just get some discussions going on, and of course, for next time, we're going to be taking a look at the N64, or what I would have preferred for them to call it would be the Ultra 64, because I just think that just sounds so much better. But either way, though, that'll be for next time. So of course, as always, thanks you for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.